Now, the ancient Greeks gave us our civilization, or so they thought. They're very full of themselves, given to hyperbole. Now, hyperbole is a Greek word. And the Greeks give us many words. Like, for example, the Greek word for bank is trapeza, which sounds awfully like the high-wire trapeze act I'm doing at the moment. The Greeks must have looked into the future and seen the financial mess we'd be in. Now, a good trapeze artist shouldn't need a net. Now, should bad banks that fail be given a safety net? Welcome to Holy Cows. Today's episode is about bad banks. Should we just let them fail? Now, as an ex-banker, I can tell you that there was only one golden rule. You fail, you're out. Everybody knew the score. But up until then, you could take all the risks you could to keep your shareholders and your investors happy, so long as you warn them of the risks, of course. So we invested in everything from Ethiopian asset backs, whenever Ethiopia had any assets to speak of, to Guatemalan banana futures, to Moldovan mortgages. We wanted value and we went and we took risks to get it. That was the beauty of capitalism. But when we start bailing out banks that took foolish risks, then what we're doing is that we're destroying the system on which a capitalist economy is based. This is not only silly, but it's also unfair. Ed, thank you so much for coming on to Holy Cows. Now, the subject of today is, should banks be allowed to fail? Now, I have a question for you. A good trapeze artist shouldn't need a net. Why should banks be given a safety net?
Well, I think that in general, in capitalism, it's important that banks and companies do fail. It's important that they are aware that they could potentially fail. But in some cases, the point is that it could be so damaging for the rest of the economy, for people, and for just in general the entire wider financial system if a bank was allowed to collapse. And so there are some kind of cases where capitalism shouldn't be allowed to go the full course, its kind of aggressive collapse of companies.
Anybody would tell you that a trapeze artist who knows that there's a safety net underneath him is more likely to take the kind of silly, foolish and unnecessary risks that he wouldn't have taken had the net not been underneath him in the first place. The same thing applies to banks. A bank that knows that it has a safety net underneath it is more likely to act in the same silly way. And we know all about that, don't we?
This is what's called moral hazard. I mean, this is the very boring term that economists have for it. It means that basically you take it for granted if you're a company that you can always be rescued whatever happens. And that's the big question. That's the big dilemma at the moment, is if we're going to rescue certain banks just from failing, just for the sake of saving their kind of customers or for the sake of saving their shareholders, then that creates this terrible moral hazard that in the future they'll take greater risks and they will take it for granted that they will be able to be saved.
So, Ed, the $64 million questions. Is nationalization back in through the back door?
I hope not. And I genuinely hope not, because I believe that capitalism and the free market really do work. But what we've had is this horrific financial crisis of a type that we really have not seen since the Great Depression. And when that kind of thing happens, you have to do unusual things. And unfortunately, as much as a lot of us didn't like the taste of it, this probably, given the circumstances, was the right thing to do.
So do you think our governments and central banks have lost the moral right to lecture other countries on free markets?
Well, that's a good question. I think that this has been damaging for absolute kind of free market capitalism. And it's shown that however free market we say we are, in the UK, we say that we're massively free markets. We just had to nationalise a bank. We had to nationalise a bank for the first time. We had the first bank run since Victorian times. We had to nationalise a bank. It's the first big nationalisation in decades. How can we say that we're completely espousing the free market system?
So, saving Northern Rock was really that important for the survival of our capitalist system? For Pete's sake, we survived the Depression of the 1930s. I think it was a wonderful opportunity for the system to weed out those banks that didn't follow the risk guidelines and which got us in this mess in the first place. Sometimes you have to let the bad bank go. I think we should look back to the Greeks and learn something from them. They were wise in their own way. Because the answer to a bad trapeza, which is bank, is euthanasia, which is also a word with Greek origins, funnily enough, and it means an easy death, which I'm sure you'll all admit is far better way to go than the expensive bailout which the taxpayers are going to have to pay for. And let's admit it, there's many other banks out there in the world. When one goes, there'll be many others to replace it.